Okay, your third exercise involves creating small atmospheric perspective designs. And your shape should be approximately 2 inches by 3 inches. Drawing very light guidelines for your shapes or for your boxes. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do two versions. You're going to do light to dark, and you're going to do dark to light. And with atmospheric perspective, we're dealing with a change in the size of the object, because as it goes farther away from you, it gets smaller. And we're dealing with the change in the value. And in true atmospheric perspective, those objects that are closest to you are the darkest and more intense, and those that are the farthest away from you are the lightest and lack the most detail, or lack detail. And we talked about that in class. We're going to do a second exercise, which is just the opposite, showing that a technique where the lightest areas or the brightest areas are in the front and the darkest areas are in the back. And very often, as I had mentioned in class, this is something that is used in botanical illustration when you have objects that are in the back but are very close to the foreground. So what you need to do here is you need to create some simple shapes, and you can come up with something. They can be half rounds, they can be squares, they can be triangles, but whatever they are, they should be a simple shape that would start fairly large and draw a very light guideline, because again, you're going to be working with tone as opposed to line, and we want the lines to actually disappear. I want to work with a little harder pencil. 2H. So as you go back in space, your shapes are going to be slightly smaller as you go back. And we will eventually render these once we have our guidelines in place. And you can see as I'm drawing these, it's a very basic shape. You can use this one, or if you want to come up with something else. You can see that as we go back in space, they get smaller and smaller. So in this case, I think I'm going to switch to a HB pencil, and we're going to create a tone value that's fairly dark. Again, I would not go too dark at once at the first time, so that you can get all of your values worked out first. And you can even do one row, or do one object in a row, so that you kind of get a feeling for how this is going to work. And you can see as my pencil gets to the edge that my guideline starts to disappear, because it takes on the value, or the tonal value, of the object itself. So now the one behind, and you can see that I'm probably going to have to go a little darker on that one in the foreground, because this pencil happens to be quite soft. Oh, yes. All right, so if that's the lightest one, you can see I'm going to have to darken. I'm going to have to darken, which means I'll have to go over things a couple times. So this one now, we're really going to have to give a little more strength to, so we'll work it up. So now we know what values we have to work with when we do the rest of these images. Again, put something under my hand in order to keep my drawing clean. I'm going over the value again because I think I want it even darker, because it's still not enough distinction between those two shapes. And again, you build up the graphite on the page. Build it up, not adding pressure, but building up layers, because the minute you start to put pressure on it, you start to compress the fibers of the paper, and then you start to get this bloom, which you really don't want to have. And we could probably even put another layer in here, very light, but then again, we're going to go back in and darken till we get the values that we need. And this will take you a little bit of time, but do one of these a night, and then you'll have them all done for class. Now, I did say something in class about darkening in the behind these lower, or these frontal images, but I'm going to retract that and say just do an even tone for each of these. And then as you do these, you're going to match your tones based on the level that this object is in the picture plane, whether it's close to you or farther away. So that's dark to light. Now with the light to dark, what I'm going to recommend is let's do this waveform. And you can create kind of a nice little landscapey look with this, changing the curves. Again, keeping these lines very light because they're going to have to get darker and darker. And as you go farther into space, make them slightly closer together so that you start to get a sense of distance. Because as you go farther and farther back in space, you will find that things get compressed. But in this case, we're working the opposite way. So we're going to put in some values in here, filling in your space to get the tones that you need. And you probably want to keep the first shape. Now we see we got a long ways to go here, so maybe the best thing to do here is we'll start by laying in a 10% value, because that'll give you some place to work to. Alright, so these all should be nice and even. These should be nice and even, seeing no pencil marks. And the first value will be in the second shape. So that gives us the guide. So the first shape in the front is 0%, the second is 10, and then you're going to go a little darker, making sure you define the edges nicely. Then you're going to go darker still. And this will give you a guide for each one of these shapes, as we said before, only just the opposite. Alright, then this next one is going to have to be even darker still. Again, we don't want to see any guidelines, we just want to see tone. Yep, it's coming. Build up the tone, build it up. Come back, build it up some more. Until you get the values that you need. And this last one will be quite dark. So I'm going to have to build it up so we get it to where it's going to be quite distinct. And this will give you, if you do this at one end, then this will give you the guide for the values that you need for the rest of the image. And there you go.